download them from on the NEMA website shortly. So I'm going to let Dan Yeager, the director of NEMA, take it over from here.
Well, thank you, Heather. Appreciate it. And hello and welcome, everybody. Great to be with you here today. It really gives me great pleasure to introduce Marilyn Hoffman as today's Lunch with NEMA speaker. I think that if there's anybody who can give us some pretty good advice on museum careers, it's got to be Marilyn. She's had a really distinguished museum career that's included leadership at places like the Currier Museum of Art and Fuller Craft Museum, and she's worked at the MFA Boston, the Met in New York, and RISD. And now as the principal of Museum Search and Reference, Marilyn has her finger on the pulse, so to speak, of museum careers nationwide. And she's more than once shared with me a lot of her insights as we've been developing here at NEMA programs for museum professionals, so that's been very, very helpful. She's also been very passionately committed to NEMA throughout her career. She served as a board member and an officer years ago, and now through her role at Museum Search and Reference, she's a regular supporter of the NEMA Conference and has been very helpful to me as I've transitioned into my role as the director here. So Marilyn, thanks for all you do for all of us in the field, and thanks for spending time with us here today. Take it away.
Well, Dan, I'll pay you later. That was a lovely introduction, more than I deserve, but I am happy to be here, and I know we have a group of people on, and I imagine people will be joining as we go along. I hope that if people cannot hear me, or if it's hard to hear me, that they'll send, I guess instead of a question in, they'll send a comment that they can't hear and let us know. I'm going to go through some points that are on a handout that you're going to have available in a little while called Tips on Career Advancement for Mid-Career Professionals. And I can't claim credit for all of this. I took some notes at some other seminars. But anyway, I'll go through some points with that. Oh, great, my internet just stopped working. Can you hear me?
Yep, Marilyn, I can hear you.
Okay, interesting. It said my internet stopped working and my connection I see flashing on and off.
Well, as long as you're on the phone, you're good. So
okay.
That's the main part of it, is because you're not doing a PowerPoint presentation, so you'll be fine if it's just voice.
Okay, great. And the other thing is, of course, I haven't been a webinar presenter before, so if I am using the technology wrong, or if you lose me or something, let me know.
Oh, we will.
So anyway, I will start right in, and do submit your questions as we go, because I certainly want to answer those in some cases as we go along. If DJ and Heather suggest that, or certainly toward the end. First of all, people wonder what mid-career is, and I think that varies, but one definition that I've seen is that you have 10 or more years of experience, but you still have 10 or more years to go before you retire. And I think that could be broader. There are some people in very responsible positions who might only have even 5 or 7 years of experience, but they are starting to be established. So anyway, we're theoretically here for all of you, so wherever you are, and we'll have a little information on the survey, which, Heather, I may not see unless my internet pops back on. My computer guy was here yesterday. It's supposed to be fixed.
Oh, no.
Anyway.
Okay, so what it is that for 1 to 7 years, we had 11%. 7 to 20 would be 58%. 20 to 30 is 5%. And 30 to 40 is 2%.
Oh, beautiful. Okay, so most of you are certainly in quote-unquote mid-career, with a few perhaps a little more junior, and but most people, yes, in mid-career. So we have the right audience. Isn't that wonderful? And let me just start talking about considerations if you are thinking of moving to a new job, because probably you're here because you see a need to move to advance, or some way to advance at your organization. But often there is no chance to move up where you are because the person over you may be not moving on, or the museum may be too small, or whatever. So you may feel that you have to move to another museum or organization to advance your career. And that's a very common situation, but it's something you certainly need to think about. And of course, I would definitely advise you, meanwhile, not to quit your job and to continue to work hard where you are. But there certainly are situations, for example, if your peer has just become your boss, it might be a message that you're not going to advance, and someone else will appreciate you more. So one comment I want to make is that in order to advance, you may have to make a lateral move. I think everyone always wants to move up to the next, level of position, however they define that. But sometimes you can gain experience that's very different from yours. Anyway, you would be open to lateral moves. And one example I wanted to give that I just heard about recently is Tina Olson, who is now the director of the Williams College Museum in Massachusetts as of 2012, was a person who was at the Getty for a long time, 11 years. And she, I guess, must have realized that to advance she had to make some kind of a lateral move, that she was not going to jump into the directorship of a museum without more experience of a different kind. So she went to the Portland Art Museum in Oregon and became director of education and public programs. She was a Renaissance scholar and curator, so this was an interesting move. But of course, a job like that gave her experience managing people, doing more administration, maybe writing grants, which you could do less perhaps at the Getty, or at least they used to. So anyway, it gave her a different kind of experience, and from there she was able to become the director of a wonderful museum. So that's at a fairly high level, but it gives you an idea of how you could find something different that you may see as lateral, and maybe it doesn't pay more, but it would be valuable. For example, if you're in a very large organization, moving to a small organization where you might wear more hats might be good, or just working with a different boss, because that new boss might have different connections, a different style that you'd want to learn from or react against. You could learn a new collection and expand your knowledge in the field of your specialty, and you'll get new colleagues who might actually help you find a new job. So there are a number of reasons that you might want to take another job, even if it doesn't seem like a step up, it's a step sideways. But if you like your current job and you are, in a job these days, there's always a risk that your new job won't work out well. So you do have to be very careful. I would say that in this economy, it can take people 6 months or more to find a job at the mid and high level. So, the right opening has to come up in the right location. So you want to stick with your job and make sure it's right. It's not a time you can take too many risks. But the other approach is, of course, to stay in your current job, but learn and grow in the job you're in. And I haven't read the Lean In book yet that everyone's talking about, particularly about women. But I think that's the concept. You could ask your supervisor what skills you need to reach the next level and how to get them. Or you could tell your supervisor what you want to learn because, for example, maybe you want more responsibility in project management or hiring and supervision of others, or in budgeting or fundraising. And sometimes you just have to volunteer to take on new responsibilities like that. So, an example could be that if there's a hire going on, even in another department, you could ask to participate in the search, to volunteer to help screen the resumes, or ask to sit in on interviews. And that would give you a new kind of experience if you haven't had that. Or even just asking your supervisor questions about why the institution does things, and generally trying to get skills outside what you're already doing. And looking, I think, I have a note here, it says act more like a senior manager. And that really means taking a broader view of what's good for the museum as a whole, not just your department. One of the areas of growth when people either go from a particular division within a department or into higher management is then they suddenly have to look broadly beyond their comfort zone, beyond their own department, and see the whole institution or see a whole department. So that, taking that perspective from the start could identify you as someone who has that capability. You can diplomatically suggest new ideas of doing things, but of course then you have to offer to be the point person to carry them out. So often taking on more responsibility is clearly more work, but that might be what you need and certainly would be appreciated. Or volunteering to help write a grant, or if someone's visiting a donor on your project, if the development office usually does that, to say, one time could I go along and start getting a little bit of fundraising experience, which is certainly a valuable skill these days. Perhaps taking more risks, trying new programs or a new way of advertising a program. And I have one suggestion that came out of one of these conferences I thought was a great idea. It says, call a person who you are afraid to call, a famous person, to lecture, perform, or volunteer a service, or counselor to help you reach another person. It says, one successful leader set a goal to call one such person each week. So I think it's just, stretch yourself. Try something you don't think will work, and what do you have to lose? And maybe it'll be impressive. Then another way to advance yourself if you can't move is to find ways to learn from your colleagues that are there. For example, create an informal learning group at your museum that gets together every 4 or 6 weeks to discuss an article or a book chapter, and that can create new energy and new contacts. Or you can even form a book discussion group by conference call with 3 or more people, or do something across department on a project. Throw out questions that require joint research to answer so that you have to work with other people in another department. And certainly one suggestion says attend a webinar. So there you are, you're already doing that. And some people have actually formed a group in their city. Now I realize some of you may be in rural areas, but New England's fairly small. An example given in this particular conference was that in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, there's a group of people in their 30s and 40s that gets together in each other's homes, and 15 or 20 people are involved, and they do this regularly. And you could see where that would create a wonderful collegial group and people to turn to ask questions and to help you grow. The next idea I'm a big believer in, and that is to get involved in your professional organization, which in this case is NEMA, or it may be AASLH, or your history or art history or science group. And you can volunteer or chair a committee. You could get yourself nominated for the board. Or you could volunteer to help edit their newsletter, whatever you are good at. And you can sign up to be, you can ask if you could be a MAP or accreditation volunteer or an IMLS grant reviewer. I think people who have gotten one IMLS grant, even if you didn't totally write it, are actually eligible, and they're always looking for volunteers. It's quite a bit of work, but it's very, very instructive.
Marilyn, this is Heather, and I have to agree with you on the IMLS grant. BJ and I have both read them before, and they actually are always looking for volunteers to do that job. So if anybody's interested, definitely look at IMLS's website.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that is something you can put on your resume. I see that all the time on resumes, that I was a grant reviewer for this or that, state grants or whatever. Certainly you want to participate in conferences. We have the NEMA conference coming up in November. And often, I know the American Alliance of Museums meeting can be very expensive, but they do have a roommate sharing service, and people carpool, and sometimes people stay at a friend's house. So sometimes there are cheaper ways to go to those conferences, or even to get a one-day registration by volunteering in some conferences. Certainly, if you do go to the conferences, one way to make yourself known is to organize a session, maybe with a colleague, or present on a panel, or nominate someone for the awards that they're giving out. So there are different ways to involve yourself and have your name in the program, and then people certainly notice you. I mean, I know I see other search consultants attending these meetings, and I certainly scout talent there and listen to sessions. So you could do all those things. Again, it's work. It's work. But it benefits the field, and it'll benefit you. You'll make friends and get contacts. I also think sometimes it's expensive, but you should try to attend the meals and special events. Even if you have to pay your own money, I think it's a good investment, because when you're sitting with someone at a lunch, you just get to know them better than you might in the hall, or attend your special interest in committee meetings and reunions. Often they're free and a great way to network. So I'm also pushing, NEMA and conferences, and it certainly helped my career. In fact, I'll divert here to tell a little story. Another one of my theories about getting ahead in any field is that it's not always what you know, it's who you know. And an example of that is I certainly obtained both of my curator jobs, which then led to director jobs, through being recruited by people I know. And at the Courier Museum, it was really thanks to NEMA, because I was on the NEMA board at that time with Mac Doty, who was director of the Courier, and then when he began to search for a curator, we already knew each other from the board, so I was recruited there. So I always joke that, being on the NEMA board got me a job for 12 years. So definitely participate in that. The next item is rather unusual. I don't think most people have a sabbatical, but some people have long vacations, and you could use that to publish something for Museum Magazine or Curator Magazine, or just to visit other museums and visit colleagues. Busman's Holiday. You yourself can become a mentor, and finally, to someone on your staff. And finally, I think that sometimes you can use what seems like an awful or a demanding situation to your advantage. For example, if you have a colleague on maternity leave or on health leave, you can volunteer to fill in for some of their duties, or perhaps all of them, to give you an acting position for a certain period that could, help you learn and advance. And if you can't do this at work, you can fulfill yourself and keep learning outside of your work if you can't move to another job. For example, you could advocate for the arts or for museums with AAM or your state advocacy group. You could volunteer at a community organization in a role you want to learn more about. You could join a local board. For example, I think local historical societies really welcome museum people of all kinds to join their boards. They're often very small budgets and welcome expertise. You don't always have to give money. So you can, do things. You can take evening courses. You can attend lectures at other museums. So there are a lot of ways you can advance yourself outside your job. I'm going to pause there a minute, Heather. Do we have any questions I should answer at this point?
No, but just as a reminder, everybody, if you want to type questions in. And then I noticed on the attendee list, previous webinars, it actually lists where people are from. This time around, it did not. So if you guys just want to put in the chat feature where you're at so other people know who's on the call and everything, that would be great, because usually it says next to the name of where they're at, but it didn't do it this time. So if you guys just want to go ahead with that. And just a reminder, do ask questions at any time. If Marilyn's not able to answer them or give advice, we do have other people in the webinar that will actually help too.
Okay. My next topic is how to move, to a new job other than having done all those things and being ready. Certainly, you need to update your resume. You probably always should have that up to date just in case. And what you want to do is document your accomplishments. And often I see resumes that read like job descriptions instead of lists of accomplishments. And instead of listing what your duties are, which you might want to cover, it's really nice to list, for example, something quantitative or even qualitative, but numbers are nice. If your job involves membership or publicity, you might be able to cite some statistics of how successful you were. You might be able to list a grant you got or several. You might be able to say that you increased attendance at a particular kind of program, or that you changed the exhibition program, or you got a great review in the Boston Globe by Sebastian Smee of your exhibition. So in any case, it's important as you look at your resume to get a job, not just to list what you do, but what you accomplished. Did you make a difference for your department or your organization? Did you do something differently? Did you restructure it? What did you do? Did the budget increase? And of course, another thing you could do is go out and get a master's degree if you don't have one, because that's a very valuable degree. And people certainly do go back to graduate school at all ages today. Older students often do much better. And there are nights and weekend programs for professionals. So if you feel that that's what's wrong with your resume, you might want to do that. And there might be scholarships available, or your employer might know something.
Marilyn, sorry, Heather again. I did have a question come in asking about how do you get advice for gaining experience, particularly with budgeting and finance? Would that be more like coursework, like the MBA? We actually had someone type in that they are at the MBA program right now. Just, suggestions on how to get more budgeting and finance experience.
That is an excellent question, because that is an area that if you want to move up to a higher level, that would probably be one of the questions at your interview. And I think there are a variety of ways to do that. There certainly are courses you can take. I know at one point in my career, I decided I needed some marketing experience and courses, so I went to the University of Lowell. There are a lot of, mostly at community colleges and state universities, have very, very reasonable programs in the evening and on weekends for professionals, and certainly probably in administration, staff administration, finance, marketing, things like that. Actually, those courses are more common than art history and, things you would want to learn about museums. So that's certainly one possibility. At your work, often people are just handed their budget, especially if they're not, the department head. And I think you can certainly say, I want to create my budget, and even just learning the basics of giving my figures from last year, I want to do the projections for next year, or how do I do the projections for next year? For example, the mileage rate for your speakers that you're bringing in for your programs might change, and someone could show you, how that works at your institution or where to find that. Just even small things like that, so that you would begin to know the building blocks of creating a budget. And then, once you have your budget and you understand it better, you probably already you have some budget that you're supposed to monitor monthly, and take that seriously. If you're off budget, talk to your supervisor about it. Where can I save to make this up? So you have that attitude that you think is important. You'd be surprised how many quote-unquote creative people turn their nose up at finance and budgeting, and yet that's certainly a skill that relates to program, relates to strategic planning. So yes, that's an excellent idea to gather more skills in that area and kind of, offer to do your own and advise on it or whatever.
Yep, Dan actually asked the question that I hear from many people who know they need development fundraising experience to move up the ladder, but they hate it. Any advice?
That's absolutely true. I hate to say it, but the people with fundraising success can command more jobs and money. And I think sometimes people are surprised that, they have the impression no one wants to fundraise. So if you volunteer for it, they might say, wow, absolutely, yes, do it. And you might have to do it in the evening, but I think there are a lot of ways you can get experience in fundraising. If you have a program that's short on funds, you could yourself research grants for that. Ask, where can I research grants? How do I do that on the web? And, what if you came up with a possible source for that grant? Maybe then you could take the next step and write a letter of inquiry or call the foundation officer or whatever it is, grant officer, and then actually, volunteer to write a grant, which you would do probably in collaboration with someone else. either the content person or the development side, or your supervisor or your supervisor's supervisor, which would be even better. So, you certainly could volunteer to do that. I would say more and more that money is coming from private donors. Wealth is not equally distributed in America, and we're not here to solve or discuss that problem, but it does mean that there are donors who would like to give and have the capacity. And so that, you could learn about how do you match people to what they're interested in, because that's one of the tricks. And, again, talk to your supervisor or to a colleague in another department. I have this program, I don't have enough money for it, or I need a part-time assistant, but there's no way this institution is going to fund it. Where can I explore ideas or people without stepping on toes? You don't want to go out to Mrs. Big Buck without checking with the development department and others because maybe they already asked them last week and you don't want to turn them off. But, there may be other people. You may even know people who are doing well in your circles, or a graduate student that you knew that now has a big job and obviously is interested in your topic. And, these people could become your donor circle. So I think there are a lot of ways that in that very, very important area that, by volunteering and asking questions and then doing something, writing the grant or writing the letter or going on a call, it may seem silly, but whoever is doing your corporate membership program, for example, at your museum, may be really tired of calling on the same 6 banks every year. And if you went in and said, I want to go with you 3 times, and then I'm going to go on a call to a bank about renewing their membership or getting a membership, they might just faint and say, wow, okay, do it, I'm going to train you. So, getting experience doing actual solicitations might not be as hard as you think, and very, very valuable. Well, we'll go back to thinking about other types of jobs for a few minutes. And what I want to say is that you should always look at other parts of the country. I know some people are settled, especially as you get into mid-career. You may have a spouse or partner, you may have children in school, and there are obviously sometimes, if your child is about to be a senior in high school, it may be very hard to move right now. But I do think there are sometimes more excitement and growth and jobs available in other parts of the country, and everyone wants a job in Boston. So, there's so many graduate schools and programs, and people pour in, and everything you apply for in Boston, they're going to have a great number of bright and qualified people. Now, I'm not saying they don't in Birmingham, Alabama, or in Milwaukee, or in Des Moines, Iowa, but you may look fantastic because you're out of a prestigious program in the East, or you've worked at a known museum in the East, and you might be able to get a job there that is a full curator or director of education that you could not get in the Boston or New York or other markets or in New England at all. So that's certainly an option. And once you go there, you might be blown away by in Oklahoma and Texas, there's just huge oil money, and those museums are expanding rapidly. The population is moving south and west, so that the Phoenix museums in Phoenix are coming into being, growing like Topsy, hiring people. So anyway, don't turn your nose up at Kalamazoo, Michigan, or someplace that you think is between the coasts. You could get a better job there and stay 5 or 10 years, and then come back if your family is here. And certainly you have to be open to other types of jobs, as I've mentioned. If you're, you may want to be a curator, but maybe you should try being an educator, or even go into marketing or fundraising for a while to get those credentials. You can enlarge your purview, and then say, okay, I'm not going to be in this job or role forever, but maybe you're an assistant in the registrar's office, and you can't get the full registrar's job, but you could go into something else and then come back as the registrar. So be open to that.
Hi, Marilyn. This is BJ. We have another question. Dawn Salerno asks, what do you think is the best way to work with a mentor? Is it shadowing, working on a project together, simply asking questions, role-playing, all of the above?
That is another great question, because certainly one way people do advance is by having a mentor. I know in my case, this is very long ago, don't laugh, but I did a graduate assistantship at the Metropolitan Museum for one summer, and at that time, John Walsh, who later became paintings curator in Boston and then director of the Getty Museum, was a graduate student at Columbia, and he was one of my supervisors. The other one, interestingly, was Phil Yenawine, who wrote the visual strategies thing. You know, it was a new thing then. So, you know, just that one internship, in particularly in John's case, gave me a mentor that I kept in touch with over the years. And I think there are different ways to do that. You might keep it at a completely professional level and keep in touch, let them know when you have a new job, ask them questions, have lunch with them. In other cases, they might become professional and personal friends. So, I mean, there's nothing wrong with inviting a colleague into your social circle and invite them and their spouse or their partner to go to dinner with you, with your partner, or you know, visit them and, you know, do things with them, because friends often help friends, and certainly professional friends help professional friends. The end of the story is that when I was curator at the Courier and a candidate for the directorship, I think it was important that John Walsh, who was then director of the Getty, called the chair of the board and said, you know, you ought to look at Marilyn. And, you know, so those old friendships can come around, become mentors and come around and help you. But more on a day-to-day level, you might have a mentor right at your museum. This is someone you should turn to for advice. People like to be asked advice and, you know, ask questions. And sometimes you have to work at that. You know, you're very, very busy, and it seems like there's no time to take the time to ask someone or have lunch with them, but you do want to do that. When you have a problem, people like to help you solve problems. And it should be a two-way street. I think some people enjoy mentoring someone from the younger generation because perhaps they're not very good at technology, for example. And so through hearing about how you relate to Twitter or something, they can learn too. So don't assume that, you know, they're just helping you, and certainly you want to thank them if they do help you. And then I would call on them, you know, call on people for references, and call on people. You know, you have to let people know that you're ready to move and want a new job. How would they know? And that can be tricky because it's confidential and you don't want to alarm your boss. But you can let people know, your colleagues from graduate school who are now out in the field, your friends you've met at NEMA. You know, you can quietly let people know that you're very happy where you are, but you feel you're ready for a next step. And if they hear of something, you know, please put in your name or tell you about it, because that's often the way jobs do go around. Or you might hear something you never would have known about. You know, you can use those people as kind of mentors for helping with your career, and, you know, maybe it'll be a two-way street. You might hear about something for them. I don't know if that answers that question, but that is a valuable relationship and friendship that should be beneficial both ways.
Hi, Marilyn. This is BJ again. Emily Robertson has a question. She's getting an MBA at Babson, and how do you feel about LinkedIn, using LinkedIn as a tool for making career connections or other online social media?
Yes, very good point. LinkedIn has become a very valuable tool. I use it constantly. For example, any job search I'm working on, a lot of people are nominated. And I used to just have to call them up and ask who they were and whatnot. But, of course, today with the web and with LinkedIn, you can do a lot of research on people before you even meet them. LinkedIn is a really easy way to see people's bio. And so you should be sure to have your bio on LinkedIn with your jobs and degrees. And I've seen some silly things, too, where people put that they're looking for a job and their boss can see that. I mean, I wouldn't quite do that. But anyway, you should make sure that's good. Now, the other way people use LinkedIn for jobs, okay, let's say you're applying for a job at the Wadsworth Atheneum in Hartford, and you don't know anyone there. What you can do is search on LinkedIn for people who perhaps worked there in the past or have worked there or are working there that you might be able to call for more information. For example, okay, let's say you're applying for a job in the education department at Hartford and you don't know anyone. You find on LinkedIn someone who left there a year or two ago for another museum, but at least worked there, especially in the education department. You would want to use that person to, if they're willing, to at least find out if this is a great place to work, if the boss is the kind of person you'd want to work for, or maybe after you talk to them a while and say, could I send you my resume and I'm looking at this job, maybe they're going to run into their boss or be in touch or see them at a conference next week and would say, oh, by the way, I talked to someone who seemed like a nice person who was very interested in your job. I think you should look at her or him. And so anyway, people use LinkedIn quite a bit now to find contacts. The other thing you can find is, okay, you went to graduate school, you went through, let's say, the Tufts program, but that was only in a 2-year span. But you can look on LinkedIn for other people who list that program, and then you have something in common with them, which is how people use LinkedIn. Okay, so you find someone who also went to Tufts, and my goodness, they live near you, and you can contact with them. Or, they also worked at Hartford and whatever it is. So people use LinkedIn constantly to find whatever they're looking for, really. And yeah, excellent way to make sure you look good and to find other people. That reminds me too that if most people have a Facebook page, and it's very hard to separate your personal life from your professional life on a Facebook page. But I think people do need to go in, especially at a time they decide to look for a job, and really clean that up, or make it much more restrictive. I mean, the typical thing you see is people holding a can of beer at a party because, they were there with their friends. But there can be things that employers, believe me, employers look at these things. So, keep it professional if possible. And, things follow you. One person was saying to me he had written a blog, years ago, and now you can't get rid of it. That blog is forever out there on the web because it was for another organization. And now, he wouldn't have written it, but, you can check your web trail and make sure it's what you want. Let me talk a little bit about knowing people and making connections. Another example in my career, and I don't want to say that you would do the same thing, but you would do something different in your career, but it's about knowing people. The way I got my first job, which was curator at what's now the Fuller Crafts Museum, then an art museum, I got a call out of the blue from the director recruiting me. And the way that happened is that I was really just out of graduate school. I was working part-time at the Museum of Fine Arts as a kind of adjunct lecturer before they had trained docents in one area. And I got friendly with the HR person because we both used to go to the Boston Visual Artists Union meetings, which was a big thing at the time, with contemporary artists. And so I guess what I'm saying is that because I went to some organizational meeting about contemporary art, I met this other person, and then she asked me, she said, oh, we're having a new contemporary curator at the MFA, and he wants someone to supervise some interns because he's not here yet. That was when Ken Moffat came years ago. And so she said, would you supervise these interns? So I said, okay, I'll volunteer. I wasn't paid. I supervised these interns, and we did some work for Ken Moffat to prepare for his arrival. And it turned out that Ken Moffat was at Wellesley. The director at Brockton had previously been at Wellesley. So he called Ken Moffat and said, I need a curator to send me a few good men. And Ken Moffat said, well, men, I don't know. I'm at Wellesley. But, there's this woman, Marilyn Hoffman, who's been helping set up the contemporary department. Why don't you look at her? And that's why I got that call, because I had volunteered unpaid to supervise some interns, and I had no idea that would lead, to another 12 years of my career. So you don't know, volunteer for something, get to know people. Another thing, it's just a small point. When you're looking for a job, you have to list references and obtain references. I would try to get the most important known person to be your reference. And I say that because I made a mistake in that regard. Early in my career, I was working at the RISD Museum as an education assistant, and I asked my boss, who was director of education, to write a reference for me. It seemed logical to me since she was the one who knew me best. At that time, the director of the museum, I felt, didn't know me very well. Well, after I didn't get, it was actually a graduate school application, after I didn't get that, he came up to me just indignant and said, "Why didn't you have me write a reference? I went to there. I could have gotten you in." And it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks that sometimes it's not the person who best knows you, because some more important person who people trust and know can always find out about you. They can have the director of education write up the details of the reference for them, but they'll sign it. So I just pass that on as something, if you can get a reference from the director of the museum or the head of the department or the highest person or someone, let's go back to the Hartford analysis, you find someone who has worked there previously who knows you pretty well through another tie. Maybe they should be your reference because they're going to trust that person and know that person. So there's a whole art to getting the job once you've applied, of getting the right people to recommend you. Maybe you need to have someone call the person who's hiring and say, "Oh, you should look at that resume. You should interview that person." That's like a 2-minute call. And that could get you attention where maybe they don't put you in the other pile because they don't know you. So you can kind of, line up your supporters and have them be proactive for you. Well, I'll pause again there to see if we have other questions. Or
we do have some people typing, so we'll see.
Okay.
We do have a question is, when is it or is it ever the right time to tell your boss that you're job searching or have a job prospect? That's a touchy one.
Sensitive question. And, the answer is always, I suppose, it depends. I would be very careful because the bosses range, in a lot of ways, and you'd have to know your supervisor. Some supervisors are actually known for mentoring people and then pushing them along and helping them get other jobs, and they see that as part of their role, so that they do lose their best people to other jobs, and they appreciate that. And maybe that kind of a supervisor you could say, emphasizing, "I'm very happy here. I expect to stay here a while longer, but maybe as part of your job evaluation when they ask, your career goals, if they do, or you could bring it up to say, one day I would like to be a such and such, or I would like to move on to this. And so if you can find ways to help me, it might be an introduction to letting you take on more responsibility. There are other supervisors, and you would probably know if this person really depends on you, you're their right hand, they would be crushed, even though, you're going to move anyway, but that it would set off some kind of a chain that wouldn't be good. Or there are people who are very sensitive and jump to conclusions, so that no matter how happy you are, they might take it personally and think that you're not happy or that you don't like them. So you would have to judge, your supervisor. Perhaps you've seen them either help advance other people or go to pieces when someone left. So that could be part of your clue. In general, I think that you don't want to become a lame duck or have people start talking about how you're overambitious or just really trying to advance your own career. And certainly, if you do reveal this, you want to absolutely continue to give your all to your current institution, not only because you would do that, and, you need the reference, but because you do want to give that message that you're still here, your heart is here, but someday, you'd like to move on. So I guess you'd have to judge if that's going to set off a bad reaction. Sometimes people reveal it not to their supervisor, but to one or two other colleagues, probably the people they have lunch with and are really friendly with, and kind of swear them to secrecy, which is risky. But sometimes that can be helpful because they can help you advance in some way without alarming your boss. Now, other people out there may have had experiences or have, contributions they'd like to email in about some of these questions to amplify my answers.
Hi, Marilyn. This is BJ again. I had a boss once in a previous situation that announced that he was going to leave in a 4-month period, and without a job prospect at that time. But that actually worked successfully for him. So something else. It's a risk to do that, but at least then you can make your search public.
Yes, and I think in terms of listing references, often people are not able to list their current boss or even anyone at their institution, so they often do have to think about their previous boss or their colleagues. That could be really hard. For example, let's say you've been at your institution for 20 years. Your previous supervisor would have been at a very different level or may not even be alive. So that that can make it hard, but it's certainly acceptable to not tell your supervisor. Maybe when you're a finalist, let's say you had one round of interviews and you're called back as a finalist and you're one of two candidates. First of all, the hiring organization at that point may really ask to talk to your supervisor or someone closer that knows your current work. And secondly, you might feel more comfortable, again, emphasizing that you're happy and that you only have a 50% chance of getting this job, even at that point, but that that has happened. And sometimes that can be beneficial to you. Oh, you're a finalist? Ooh, maybe I better give her a raise next year. So it could benefit you, but, it can backfire.
Hi, and then we had another question from Ann Whitty. Do you have any suggestions for maintaining dynamic professional involvement while working part-time without volunteering all of your non-paid time?
That's probably a fairly common question for a number of reasons, because people do that, at different times in their life. Well, again, you want to keep up on publications, go to professional conferences. Sometimes, especially women will drop out for a couple of years or work part-time due to maternity and family situations. And often those that are successful on reentering are the ones that continue to attend conferences and to read journals and, look online at the latest things in the field, so that when they come back or want to be full-time, that they're very, very current. I've seen people, too, who form one of these small groups. Maybe, again, if you're not in a real rural area, in your region, there might be 3 or 4 people in your situation, mid-career people who are working part-time for various reasons. And, maybe that can become a group where you meet together for lunch or have a potluck supper every 2 months. So that, again, you're making new ties and keeping current. And finding other ways to stretch so that you're both ready, for a full-time job and keeping your contacts. That's a tough one. Maybe other people have good ideas about that. I mean, people are doing a lot of volunteering at the beginning of their careers now. One unpaid internship after another. A whole generation is involved with that. Not an easy thing, and but people find ways of eventually getting into the field.
Okay, and then we do have another question, and it's, as a search consultant, do you prefer a phone call or an email if a colleague wants to nominate you?
Okay, I'm trying to think of the colleague wants to nominate you. Should they send an email, or should they call, or should you?
Michael, do you want to clear that one up? It just says, as a search consultant, do you prefer a phone call or an email if a colleague wants to nominate you?
Well, I'll start answering that while they clarify that, but I think I understand it. I get both. Usually today I get emails. For example, I'll send out a notice of a new job, and all of you can, just go to my website and sign up to get the job notices, although we're small and I might not have something for you. So when we send out a notice of a new job, I often get lots of nominations. They come right back by email, and they vary in, sometimes very short, or the helpful ones, however they come, usually have a little bit of background about why they think this person would be good for the job, and would say, feel free to contact me and things like that. So yes, a lot of it is emails. Occasionally I get phone calls. People use the phone less and less today, I suppose. But yes, I have gotten phone calls. Sometimes it's not what you want, so you'd almost prefer to have the email so you can kind of screen it and sort of thank them and go on. But yes, if it's certainly if you're already a candidate and you want someone to interview you, a phone call can be very effective there, or a way to give information. I want to tell you about this person and why I think they're great. And if the person calling sounds enthusiastic and doesn't say, she told me to call, that can be very effective. But usually I know that it can be done, yeah. Good, I'm glad you're thinking so. You should be using people that way. There's a lot of competition for jobs, as you know. So you have to stand out somehow.
And then Anne said, great idea about part-timers. Thank you. So, and then Michael, the one about the search consultant, says that was his question. So I answered that one. And then we have one from Dan. When is the best time to talk salary during the interview hiring process?
There's another sensitive issue, but important. I tend to ask people for a salary requirement or a range at the beginning because you don't want to waste a lot of time. So I'm kind of the philosophy that it's good to bring it up early, because if it's not a match, it ends the conversation, whether it's too high or too low. And it's very surprising the range of salaries that people have, so you can't always guess. A lot of people, of course, do research on GuideStar today. Probably everyone knows that. But, you can look up independent museums. Sometimes you cannot do very well with a civic, a city museum or a government museum or a university museum. But most museums, you can look up their 990s on GuideStar just by signing in. And, you can only see now salaries over $100,000. It used to be 50. That was a lot more useful. And that always lags a couple of years. But sometimes it's helpful, let's say if you're looking at a job, to look at their GuideStar report, first of all, to see if they're healthy, to look at their 990, and then you can see what some other people are paid there, so it might help you get an idea of what the range would be, if it would be suitable. And of course, it may relate to the cost of living in that location. But I like to have that a little bit up front just to make sure it's a match. However, when you're at an interview, see, I'm talking about working with a search consultant. That's a lot easier. I can screen that in the beginning. Usually at a first interview, people don't talk about those issues at all. At a first interview, you're probably not going to talk about when you could start, or what benefits and health care you need, and whether you could sell your house, and all those things. You're probably not going to bring up very early, and your salary. But certainly just determining if the range, is suitable and a match, I think can be done fairly early, either by you saying what you're looking for, or they, ask. It's a little dance. You can ask them what the range is, and then they may turn to you and say, what are you looking for? Because it's probably a wide range. So, that's a dance. And I think that the impression you leave about it, for example, if you say, I just wanted to make sure that we're not wasting time, that the salary would be in the proper range for what I'd require, but I'm really more interested in the nature of the work and an exciting job. so it doesn't look like you're only interested in that. I think it can be broached.
And also another.
I just want to say we only have a few minutes left, and
yeah,
we probably have more questions. We can do that, but I do want to emphasize that museum work is really wonderful work and extremely rewarding and exciting and satisfying to people doing work they love. So even if your career isn't perfect, you are doing something incredibly valuable to society, and it's just important work, and it's often very rewarding work. So if you get frustrated, do keep that in mind. But let's go back to you.
Does anybody else have any questions? And also a little push for the NEMA did a salary survey a couple years ago, and we're in the process of redoing it with more of a national museum salary survey, so that will be out next year. But that's another useful tool for salary ranges too.
Yes, and I will say that as you look at salary surveys, you have to do a lot of extrapolating. Often people just take the figures and they say, oh, that's what it is, here's the median. But you have to look at where that museum falls in the group range that is shown there, and you have to extrapolate. History museums pay less than science museums or art museums, and they don't just take the figure. Think about how that figure reflects different ratios or the cost of living in the city. And it may change it somewhat, or just even updating it if it's 3 years old. Maybe you just want to add 3% a year, or whatever NEMA says is the average salary increase to update it.
Yeah, with the national survey I know coming up, and with the NEMA one, is that we did separate it out by discipline and also by budget. So there is a big difference in some of those ones. As you said, art museums always pay more than the history museums, and then you start looking by budget, so it's like you never go off of the average or the median. You definitely have to break it down by discipline and budget.
Yes, and you may come up with your own range using several factors.
Yep. Does anybody else have any other questions? We're getting a lot of thank you, Marilyn, so everybody is appreciating this webinar.
Well, I hope you do an evaluation so we can see if this was useful. And I do want to make sure I answered people's questions, even if we go on, for a few minutes.
And then let me give you the link again in the chat feature, so everybody has that. It is on the NEMA website. If you miss this link here, is that if you go to the Lunch with NEMA and then go under the August one, the two references that she has there, which are really, really good references, because she also lists a bunch of places to look for jobs, besides NEMA jobs, of course.
Yes, and that's right. One of the handouts lists a lot of places that run ads for positions, yeah.
Yep, and then we did record this session, so that will be available on the NEMA website in a few days' time. So if anybody knows anybody else that wasn't able to make this presentation, they can also listen to it online.
That is terrific. Does that stay up for some time?
Yep, that link will, I can keep the link up for a little while.
It'd be wonderful if you just could leave these things permanently, and pretty soon you'll find people are tuning in from Australia.
Yep, and then Dan is also pushing his next one. He is giving our next presentation in September. But I want to talk about Maryland before we talk about the September one. Does anybody else have any last-minute questions here to pick Maryland's brain? Because we have been talking for quite a while. Okay, well, I wanted to also let you guys know about next month. We have 2 more coming up for the next year. November and December we're actually taking off because of the dates they fall on are holidays. So the next one in September is Presenting with Power, How to Give a Great Session at NEMA or wherever you might be speaking. So this is a great follow-up for today's conversation, truthfully, is that I know Marilyn talked quite a bit about presenting at conferences, and push our conference in November in Newport. Make sure you guys all join us. And then in October, we will be talking about websites and accessibility. But I would like to thank Marilyn for giving her time for us today. It's been great. I know I learned quite a few things too. And Marilyn, do you have any final words?
No, I think it's been a good experience for me, and I hope that everyone maybe picked up one little tip or aha moment that was useful to them.
That's great, and you are getting quite a few thank yous here. So that one, and then again, the handouts are online if you aren't able to grab that link right there. So we'll let everybody finish up typing, but thanks everybody for joining us for your lunch hour, and we hope to see you next September on the last Wednesday of the month.
Okay, well, thank you, Heather, and BJ, and Dan.
All right, great. Thanks.
See you in November, if not sooner.
Yep.
All right.
Definitely
Sounds
November.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.